Africa. It's been exactly 18 years, nearly to the day, since I presented my last show on BBC Network Africa. I did a week of nights on the week of, I think, the 18th to the 25th of August 2001. And I did 5 editions. In those days, we used to do 3:30, 4:30, 5:30, and 6:30 GMT. That was because we wanted to hit breakfast, so to speak, breakfast being 6:30, in all the regions of Africa. So I did those 5 editions a day for 5 days a week. My last show was on a Friday morning, and that was my last ever show. I didn't think it was going to be my last show because I only ever left the BBC on a 1-year career break. And as the universe, as the divine course takes you in different places you follow, where opportunity leads, I ended up not returning to the BBC, although I loved my time at the BBC. Some of the best days of my life were presenting, BBC programs and engaging with our listeners and the fans of the BBC all those years. But now it's, 18 years, nearly to the day, 18 years more than the day since I last presented one of my breakfast programs for the BBC on Network Africa.
So Max, for a time, many years, you were like the voice of Africa across the continent. How long was it that you held that voice of yours in the airwaves?
I worked for the BBC from August 1990 until August 2001. So that's a decade plus 1, that's 11 years. So I was on the air for 11 years. But I presented Network Africa for 8 years, from the mid-1990s till 2001. That's when I was one of the lead presenters of Network Africa. Previous to that, I worked on Focus on Africa as a producer, and also, doing different things in terms of the African Features Department. I made some African Perspectives, documentary programs, and I also presented the Jive Zone music show, which many people may remember, from 1992 to 1998. I was one of the co-creators of that, and again, the lead presenter of that show. So 11 years on BBC Airwaves, great time. Never thought I would leave it for longer than a year, but as things happened, I ended up doing something completely different for many, many years.
And you rubbed shoulders with someone like Robin White.
Not just rub shoulders. Robin White employed me at the BBC. He was my first editor. He gave me my first job. And I'm forever ever grateful for Robin White actually having the confidence in this young African, this young Liberian who had studied economics at the London School of Economics, who had no inclination or no idea he would be someone who could be on the airwaves. Robin White gave me my first shot. He put me on the air. The first time I've heard my voice recorded was on Focus on Africa, doing the quiz, I think it was. I did the famous Focus quiz before I started working there. And so Robin wasn't just someone who rubbed shoulders with me. He gave me my first job, and I'm forever grateful for that opportunity.
How did you reach out to him? How did you meet him where he found the confidence to give you a shot?
What happened was I was a Liberian student studying in the UK, and I finished my last exams at the height of the Liberian War. And my university, the LSE, was across the road from the BBC World Service's Bush House. And I lost contact with my family, closest family and friends. And I recall vividly sitting outside the LSE one day and thinking, how can I find out some more information about what is going on at home? Because in those days, we didn't have internet. You'd have the BBC News in the UK, which is the domestic news, but they didn't have World Service programs. Because many people might not realize this, is that World Service could only be heard throughout the night on 648 medium wave. The World Service programs, which gave you comprehensive information on Africa, were not broadcast to the United Kingdom. So I was sitting there thinking, I need to find a bit more about what's going on, because just this kind of 30-second clip on the news at 10 or the 6 o'clock news wasn't enough for me. To really know what's going on in Liberia, I needed to find out more. So a little voice inside said, why don't you go to the BBC? Then my mind said, I don't know anybody at the BBC. The voice said again, go to the BBC. So I ended up listening to the inner voice. I crossed the road to Bush House. I can picture it like yesterday, and it's 30 years ago. I went to reception. I said, excuse me, I'm a young African, I'm from Liberia. I'm trying to find out some more information about what's going on in my country. There's a war going on. Can I can I make contact with folks in Africa? I said, well, there's a phone there. That's the number. I think it was 3328. Call up to Focus on Africa.
You still remember the number?
I think it was something like that.
Yeah.
One of those old phones. I called up, and the man picked up the phone saying, "Yes," and he said, "I said I'm a young African. I'm a Liberian. I want to find out more about what's going on. Maybe you have more information." He goes, "Okay, I'll come down." He came down. Little did I know that was Robin White. I picture it like yesterday. He came down with his, I think, red flannel tracksuit bottoms, his red shoes, yeah, red hush puppy or whatever shoes he had.
They are not usually used to dressing like you, in your beautiful suit and tie at the BBC at dawn.
Even when I worked for the BBC, I didn't wear a suit. We were quite smart, casual. But Robin had a very, very distinctive style of dress. And he said, you're Liberian? You don't sound Liberian. That's why I've been in the UK for many years. He goes, okay, well, come upstairs. And I went upstairs. He let me listen to the programming that was going out. So I heard like 3 editions of Focus that day. I was able to read cuttings, listen to old programs. And that enabled me to build a bigger picture of what was actually going on the ground in country. Then he said to me, we've had a problem. Recently, we made a broadcast that the rebels were at a certain part of town. But it was a mistake. Basically, for those who know Liberia, you have the Barclay Training Center in the center of Monrovia, which is the main army base. It's like saying Burma Camp in Ghana, yeah? Mount Barclay is outside. Imagine you had somewhere called Burma Beach in Accra, which is past Labadi, outside, yeah? Or say even going towards Tema, yeah? And
You're speaking like a local. You know a bit of Ghana.
Yeah, I know a bit of Ghana. And I could say the same thing for Abidjan or Lagos. I'm a Pan-Africanist. I know at least West Africa well. And the BBC had reported that the rebels had now taken over Burma Camp. You can imagine people in Accra, at Jamestown or whatever, or Legon, East Legon, how they would be running, thinking the rebels are so close, right? Or they say that at Oxford Street, you know what I mean? Dagwa Circle,
Yes, Sue.
Osu. People fleeing. And that happened in Monrovia. And the BBC had to go back on air and apologize that they made a mistake. He says, why don't you come in for the next few days? You're not doing much. Listen to the satellite broadcast and help us transcribe it. And then we look at the map.
Make corrections.
And just say this is where they are, and so we don't make that same mistake again. So that was the start of my engagement with the BBC. And then one thing led to the other. I was offered a very short-term contract, and then I was able to get my right to stay. Because I've been in the UK for many years already anyway. I managed to get my right to stay, so then I could properly, because the first thing I was doing was unpaid. It was just literally volunteering. I was able to get some paid work, and again, just like my leaving the BBC years later, I only started working for the BBC for 6 months to a year. I had a place at Oxford University to do my master's, but I didn't have the money because I was sponsored by my parents. So I thought, well, let me earn the money for this year at the BBC, and then I'll go and do my master's at St. Anthony's in Oxford. First year finishes, I've got this new zest for broadcasting. So I asked Oxford, I said, you know what? I'm enjoying this so much. I'm saving up some money, but can I defer it for a year? I deferred for another year. Second year now, I was still enjoying it so much that Oxford said, listen, we can only defer for 2 years. So I spoke to some colleagues. I remember speaking to Julian Marshall, very famous BBC name again.
Very good newsreader.
I said, Julian, I've got a challenge here. I've got this place at Oxford, but I'm learning so much here at the BBC. I'm enjoying this so much. What would you do? He goes, well, Max, you've got to follow your passion. And if you're enjoying it, you should stick with it. He goes, look, there's many PhDs everywhere who are trying to get inside where you are now at the BBC. So if you're enjoying this, maybe you should stick with it. And that was some of the best advice I ever had, because I then ended up staying 11 years, doing some great work, meeting some people who've become very good friends and colleagues who became very good friends. And I don't regret a moment of my time at the BBC. I really enjoyed broadcasting, engaging with people, and so forth.
So that's 11 years of intense journalism that benefited the continent of Africa. And I'm pretty sure while you were doing it, you went you didn't have a clear idea what impact your work had on the population of the continent of Africa.
I think it's fair to say that, sometimes when you're gifted with something very young, it's not that you don't appreciate, you lack awareness. There's some wise European, I think, once said that youth is wasted on the young or something like that. When I think about it now, the position I was in and the level of engagement that I was able to have as a young broadcaster at the BBC was the end of an era of media influence which we want to get back again. This is before YouTube, before all these channels, before, fake news, before anyone jumping on air saying things. It was a time when people would listen to these programs, Focus in Africa, Network Africa. If you were privileged, and we were privileged as broadcasters, to capture the attention, not even capture, to own. But they gave us the attention, what I'm saying. It's not that we captured it. People willingly tuned in to the programs I presented and tuned in to my voice and tuned in to, the energy that I was willing and wanting to share with them.
And they found value in it.
And a part of me wishes that I was able to, don't get me wrong, I appreciated it at the time, but I did not appreciate it as much then as I do now, looking at the way the world has gone, where everything is so dispersed, there's so much media out there, that voices get lost. And then if you're trying to get through a signal of truth, a signal of say positivity, which is, I always, no matter what I was doing, I always try to give positivity in my coverage and my presentation. That now there's so noisy out there. At the time when there was relative silence, so that when our voice it cut through the air. I wish that I at the time had appreciated it even more. I did appreciate it, but because I was a young man, essentially a child, I was 21 years old when I started at the BBC,
Tell me about a BBC culture, which is probably something you were alluding to earlier, the value of journalism that is seeming to be missing in the world these days.
Again, people often say that things were better when you were younger. It's not like it was done in my day. But I can say as far as news production is concerned, media production, information flow, things were different. Simple things like the 3-source rule, before you put something on air, making sure that it's been checked and checked and checked again, to ensure that there is as much veracity as possible in terms of the information that's put out. I'm not saying the BBC doesn't do that, but across the media, those type of values have slipped a bit. I myself now, actually, I don't watch television news. I still listen to BBC Radio, but I just don't have it in me to be part of the viewership of the 24-hour television news cycle. Because I think there's so much noise out there and there's so much opinion. We did not deal in opinion. When I was presenting Network Africa, and I did a few editions of Focus, in those days it wasn't about opinion. It was about facts. And of course then you would interview people who want to know why. But you get to know why from one of the newsmakers. It wasn't that me, you, Komla, and Ben sitting in a studio, like you see on TV news, and pontificating about what we think someone is going to do in 3 weeks' time. Do you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of television news now deals with opinions about what someone's going to do, when they're going to do it, what dress she was wearing, what dress is she going to wear, and so forth. Again, maybe I'm speaking like a 50-year-old man, which I am, but things have changed, and they're not the way they were before. Not saying there aren't a lot of good journalists still out there, and that standards are still high, but I think the whole way news is approached, current affairs is approached, and this kind of balance now between opinion and just sticking to the facts is something I think we've lost along the way.
So tell me, what were some of the most memorable moments at the BBC in terms of reportage or presentation in which you were involved in? I mean, news events that were earth shattering or at least continent shattering.
For me, there were so many as a young man. There was Ecomog going into Liberia, a personal story for myself, the death of Samuel Doe, that's all 1990 still, the fall of Mogadishu, 1991, General Aidid entering Mogadishu, the Americans going into Somalia in the early 90s, Operation Restore Hope, Black Hawk Down, the downing of that American Black Hawk helicopter and what happened there, Rwandan genocide, tragedy that befell, Operation Turquoise. There's so many stories still be covered. Then on the positive side, the elections, the opening up of the electoral space. Countries that have been one-party states for so long, suddenly now we're opening up. South Africa, the end of apartheid, the negotiations for a new constitution. Ramaphosa at the time, who's now president, was the lead negotiator. For me as a young man, having the privilege of going to interview the late Walter Sisulu in 1991 when he came out, to London. Being in Tunis in 1994, being able to ask one of the first questions to President Mandela at the press conference in Tunis in 1994, which was his first trip as president of South Africa to an African Union meeting, covering the elections in Ghana in 2000 that saw President Kufuor, the MPP for the first time becoming the governing party of Ghana, because the NDC had it for so long. Before 2000, though, the 1999, the election that saw the election of President Obasanjo, again as president of Nigeria, having been president in the 70s, and Nigeria coming out of military rule for the first time in so many years. I mean, there were so many stories that for me personally, that resonated, that I covered. Those are just a few of them.
And all of those stories that you've just referred to, they all seem to have been carved out within the 11-year period that you were there, in a way that doesn't seem like a story you can find in another period of time within Africa's history leading up to the 21st century.
I think there is some truth in that. And again, as someone who is a Pan-Africanist, who's a historian, who it was a privilege as a young man to be witness to that history in the making. But also it was a privilege to be history that was positive. I could have been a journalist in the 70s when there were so many coups, everything was going towards negativity. But I was privileged to be around the Sisulus, the Mandelas, the opposition leaders becoming presidents like Kufuor and meeting them. Obasanjo, who'd been jailed, nearly killed by Abacha, out, president, meeting him. Those kind of things. So yeah, that period was a period of a reopening of the political space in Africa. A period in which we were seeing changes that were planting the seeds of progressive change that we're still now working on the continent. And it's hard to explain that to many people who have grown up just accepting the change that there now is. Even journalists, that was a special period. It really was a special period. And I don't think we've seen anything like that since.
When did you become a Pan-Africanist? From when you were 21 years old and somewhere around central London, walked across from the London School of Economics, across the road there's an intersection there, I believe, to Bush House. When did you become a Pan-Africanist?
I was born a Pan-Africanist because Pan-Africanism is in my blood. By that I mean, not necessarily, I became a political Pan-Africanist later, but I'm a descendant of, on my father's line, Sierra Leonean Creoles, Yoruba Creoles, Sierra Leonean Maroon, which also have antecedents in Nova Scotia and Jamaica, and we know also that many of the Maroons in Jamaica have Fanti or Akan stock. So already there, that's just one part of me you can see. there is a confluence there of Pan-Africanness. On my maternal side, my immediate grandparents were a mixture of peoples and cultures who returned to Africa from Barbados and arrived in Liberia from Central Africa, from Congo, and what is now Equatorial Guinea, from Mando Po. On the other side, African American and indigenous Liberian. So just by explaining that to you, you can see when I say I'm a Pan-Africanist, it's not because I just say I'm a Pan-Africanist. It's in my blood. What has made me, my ancestors, married across African cultural and ethnic lines. So even by doing that, they created, through this this great-grandchild, a Pan-Africanist. I became a political Pan-Africanist as a teenager at university, reading the works of Nkrumah, Du Bois, Padmore, Garvey, Malcolm X. Those are the things that really engaged me to realize that in the struggle to uplift our people on the planet, in union strong, success is sure. We as Black people, we as African peoples, have to drop the ethnic barriers, have to drop the, whatever there is that stops people from working together across cultural lines has to be put aside, because the only way we can move forward is in that union, and that union is a Pan-Africanist union. That doesn't mean that I'm not an internationalist as well, that I don't have issues with people from other cultures, but in terms of trying to push forward an African agenda, it has to be a Pan-Africanist agenda. And I say that, an African agenda being Pan-Africanist, because a lot of people are Africans, but they're ethno-nationalists. They're only interested in what makes up their space within Africa. It could be their ethno-nationalist space. But when I'm talking about Pan-Africanism, I'm talking about the peoples of the African continent, the African historic diaspora, that is our brothers and sisters in Brazil, in Cuba, in the United States, in Canada, in Jamaica, and so forth, and also the more recent African diaspora, those Africans who 2 or 3 generations have been in Europe, Australia, or whatever. We all have to come together, a common platform, to do what we can to uplift the continent. Because unless we do that, we're never really going to get a respect that we should have wherever we are on this planet of Earth. Unless Africa itself is standing strong and is thriving, you're fooling yourself. You think as a Black person, you're going to have that really deep respect from others. Because they always look at you, no matter what you're doing, no matter how good you are, past you they see Africa. So unless Africa is strong, the way you're perceived, it's not going to be very strong.
And that's why some people think that Pan-Africanism is dead.
The Pan-Africanist movement, in a way you could say, was hijacked by ethno-nationalists. This is my personal opinion. Yeah, so those who say Pan-Africanism is dead, they might be saying that because they look at what is supposed to be the child of the Pan-Africanist movement, say the Organization of African Unity and now the African Union, and they look at it and they say, well, we don't see much Pan-Africanism in that. That's a valid conjecture. I would come back with something else, but I think they're right to say they think it is dead. But it's very much alive. Even if I'm the only one, I know I'm not the only one. It's very much alive, but I can see why there are people who would say that Pan-Africanism is dead, yeah. Because it doesn't have the same momentum behind it that it had at the turn of the 20th century, say between the first movements in Manchester and so forth, going to the whole anti-colonial struggle up until '63, the Foundation Organization African Unity. There was a momentum behind Pan-Africanism, and then the coup against, the coup in Ghana and Nkrumah being overthrown and so forth. Things changed. Things changed. And so people could rightfully say Pan-Africanism is dead, They can claim that, but in my view, it's not dead. It's very much alive.
And listening to you, it's clear that there's a lot of intellectual force behind your convictions, the experiences you've gone through. You've mentioned George Padmore, you've mentioned Nkrumah and Du Bois. These are names that don't come out of the mouth of many Africans. Why is that?
I'm going to be a bit harsh, and I say this to my friends, even to my children, that in this day and age, the 21st century with the internet and whatever, ignorance is a choice. If you want to find out about who some of the leading lights of the Pan-Africanist struggle were, or those on whose shoulders the Africa today as a continent is free, people stood, you would know those names. You know those names. And so I had to go and read myself about all of that. It wasn't given to me. It wasn't part of my schooling. My schooling didn't tell me who George Padmore was. My schooling didn't tell me who W.E.B. Du Bois was. I had to go and do that research for myself. My parents didn't tell me who those people were. I, myself, did my reading. And I educated myself and then started to engage with other people and learn about this. And I said that there's so much knowledge out there. You just got to go and a lot of it's free now with the internet. You just got to go and seek it and have a passion for it. And then you will learn those names.
How many Africans are like you, not just learning about those names, but what those people stood for, what they did, the foundation they built on which they expected people like you and millions of others across the continent to build upon? How many are like you?
I couldn't answer that. I wish there were more, but I couldn't answer that. And that's also, I'm going to be a bit harsh here. I never give up hope, but I think that if really we had a true Pan-Africanist ethos, the ethos of Du Bois, Padmore, and some of those lights who really were pushing for, like Bob Marley said, a union of all our peoples, we'd be further down the road. We've come further than I thought we would when I was, say, 18, but we haven't come as far as I thought we would when I was 21 years old. We still, as African people on this planet Earth, have a long, long way to go. Even look at, say, the links between the historic diaspora and the continent. We're still treading water. Okay, this year, 2019, the president of Ghana has declared it the year of the return. Why did it have to wait till 2019? And does that mean also if you really want to return, you're going to get a passport to any African country?
And what happens next year? Would that also be a year of return, or the year of return would
exactly
just come and gone?
Exactly. It should be, every year should be the year of return, right?
Right of return.
Yeah, you should have the right of return. Every member of the historic diaspora should be, and that was how Liberia was founded. Liberia basically was, home of, if you have of African descent, you could go to Liberia and claim your nationality. That's how it was before. But things have changed.
You say you're a man of hope, but you know very well hope alone doesn't cut it. What are you doing to ensure there are a lot more people like you that keeps the Pan-African spirit alive and well?
All you can do is, if there's interest, one single individual, you speak to them, and you share your thoughts. I'm not a prophet. I'm not someone who's trying to, speak to audiences of thousands. But if there's people I meet, young people, engage with them, and the same way someone, gave me insights, I give insights. And that's all I can do.
So Max, your BBC days, your journalism days in the BBC, working for Africa, a little bit behind. So what do you do these days?
These days, I'm trying to rekindle that fire. I have a calling that really engaging with people, through media is what my passion is, and it's really where I get the fullest level of enthusiasm. So I've struck out on my own now. I have a consultancy, and I'm available to moderate, to present programs, and make programs, and do more media-related work again. After having spent many years in the kind of policy realm, but also to marry those two. There's also an interface of policy-related events and moderation and so forth. So that's the space I'm in right now, and that's the way I'm trying to build my own kind of brand in that area. Yeah.
And when you meet people who are, similarly inclined, what kind of encouragement do you give to be sure that whatever flame they've got going, it's not, it stays alive? Because there are forces, possibly hidden forces, powerful forces that work against Pan-Africanism and keeping the rich identity and traditions that are well known with the continent.
Well, as Jesse Jackson says, keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. If you know what the flame is that you're following, keep your eyes on the prize, keep your eyes on the flame. And without trying to cause a big splash, just do what you can in your space. Your space might be a big one, might be a small one, might be a medium one. In the space you're in, try and be as effective as you can. Keep the light burning and do no harm.